Hello and welcome to yet another CNBC Africa debate, this time focused on what's been happening in Rwanda and how it relates now to the African and the global perspective on matters. My name is George Ndirango, and today we focus on green growth and climate resilience across the board. Rwanda in focus. Now, in 2011, Rwanda introduced a national green growth and climate resilience strategy. This policy now guided the country's sustainable development agenda, which we saw fit into different policies after that. A few weeks ago, we got a chance to take part well within when the Rwanda Green Growth Fund, also known as FONERWA, was celebrating its 5-year anniversary. We got a chance to understand what exactly has been happening over the last 5 years and how mobilization of this particular investment and the amount was churned out now to the different players in the industry. Here's a look at some of the conversations from that debate. Ordinarily, we have to start off with the fund itself, and the question now has to go to Bright, who's the Green Fund Program Manager. We talked at the beginning about drowning the noise and making sure that we understand what exactly we're talking about today and the impact that it has on the economy. We'd like you to guide us through how the last 5 years has been, particularly in terms of uptake from consumers and partners, and trying to instill that element of a clean environment and a resilient environment without distorting the balance of the resources that we have.
For the first day, when the minister was giving his speech, he said something about green growth. And he said it's actually not about money. It's about people, individuals coming together, working together, and producing something. So my experience with the Ministry of Finance is that in 2011, the Green Growth and Climate Resilience Strategy was developed and approved by Cabinet. As someone fresh off campus who was seated in the ministry, we saw this and were like, what are we going to do about this? When you talked about green economy, at the ministry, we thought it was planting trees. We thought it was planting trees, and we thought, we had priorities like food security, access to water, energy, and we're thinking in that box, shelved off. So there was a program within the Ministry of Environment and Drama where they started preaching about mainstreaming. Mm. So they come to the ministry, they say, you know what, we can do a lot with the same resources we have. But that was still a story. Like, how do we do it? We don't have the capacity, we don't have the resources. And I would like to say that we have political leadership that's very innovative in the way they think. They're like, okay, fine, we have a strategy, but we need resources for this. How do we do it? And that's how the Green Fund was born.
All right.
So when the Green Fund was born, it did not come in to replace Minecofin in terms of resource mobilization, but rather to mobilize additional resources specifically for environment and climate change. So as the CEO mentioned in his opening remarks, we support the public sector, private sector, civil society, and he mentioned the windows. All these windows actually stem from the GGCRS and the 14 programs of action. So the fund is structured in a way that it's linked directly to the GGCRS, and we try to implement projects, programs that are multi-sectoral in nature. So we provide funding, grants for the public sector and loans for the private sector. In terms of implementation, we have around 30 projects right now under implementation across the 4 entry points the CEO talked about. We've managed, specifically for the private sector, to develop 2 instruments, because I believe everyone in this room believes that we cannot charter our way towards a green path without the private sector playing the lead role in this. So we have 2 instruments for the private sector, the innovation grant, where they can basically access up to $300,000 to implement small projects where they're doing things like demonstration, proof of concept, and they also have a credit line facility. Mm-hmm. So as you move from innovation, you're basically expanding your business. Oh. And you're doing this for profit.
Okay. Yeah. We definitely have, have a lot of questions to ask in regards to credit financing. There's some contentious issues there, so you'll be on the hot seat a little later. I'd like to throw the question now to Mr. John Kakumba, National Project Coordinator at the Nile Basin Discourse Forum. Now, ordinarily, we try to stay away from the conversation on this country in comparison to this country because we'd like everyone to function according to the resource that has been mobilized within the country. But help us understand how this was received from the Nile Basin perspective by other countries that had been trying to work out a green element in the economy but had stalled on so many levels. But here was Rwanda coming with this particular set of resources and financing and pushing through what other countries had failed to achieve.
First of all, I'm proud to say that at all platforms, Rwanda is a success story. And within the Nile Basin, civil society platform and region, we are the role models, and that is a little bit pride to say a lot about that. However, getting back home, we have a lot of challenges within the civil society accessing financing. And when you look at the global financing mechanism, the funds are getting scarce. And the requirements to access these funds are a little bit complex. Again, when you get back to FONERWA still, this is it's like a solution made home, and it should be engaging and inclusive for all of us to access financing, to tap into the opportunities of the climate, of resilience and mitigation and adaptation. Again, in order to achieve the Agenda 2030, I believe that all of us need to have a take, all of us need to be on board. FONERWA has opened the doors and the opportunities for us, except that we have a few limitations in capacity to access this funding. And I think FONERWA, I should give some homework to them that they should think of a way to bring more so that we have a sense of ownership, a sense of belonging to this fund. Because when you talk about the percentages that you've seen about the achievements, I haven't seen a lot of the CSOs or NGOs getting these funds. That is a little bit of a contradiction to me in my thinking. And I think FONERWA should challenge itself as well on this aspect, that we need to find a way to get our people, our own, to get funds. It does not make a lot of sense to have a lot of money kept in their coffers and you're not giving it to your people. And they have a lot of initiatives going on the ground. For example, my organization is piloting a mobile solar irrigation system on buffer zone management, multiplying fruit trees, targeting Bugesera and all this, the airport in Bugesera, and also looking at what is affordable for the small-scale people and the cooperatives and all this. I think this is an opportunity for FONERWA. You should not have a lot of money lagging in your coffers. It should be empty. So that means movement of money gives it value.
We'll move that conversation from you now to Mr. Innocent. So here's the perception that we have on ground. Unless you're well versed with the industry or what's happening here, there's a lot of confusion. For example, yesterday, the Honorable Finance Minister, Claver Gatete, came out and said they announced $125 million financing with the World Bank for energy, right? Within that energy, we know priority is in clean energy. And then we have FONERWA that has $100 million. So there's confusion on what exactly are we working out. We are financing here, we are financing here. Where's the prioritization for the economy and who's supplying who the money? So just provide clarity for the members in the audience that seem not to understand.
Okay, I think there would be a confusion if we had a lot of money that is far beyond what we have as a program. But the needs that we have, the projects and program that we have for implementation, they need more money than what we have. So there's no confusion when the Minister of Finance gets some portion of money and FONERWA gets additional money, as he said, so that we can have at least go up to 70% because we have a lot of green investment projects and programs that are there. If you were to ask Alex, they would tell you they received probably, 1,000 proposals. They have 35 projects on ground. So what is the confusion? But I think there was a confusion before I gave this clarification.
But still on that point, now the GGGI, since you handle policy and advising on the same, In that instance, who plugs into who? Is it the Ministry of Finance plugging into the fund or the fund plugging into the Ministry of Finance? How would you advise that particular scenario?
It depends on what you mean by plugging. The policies and guidance come from the ministry.
Right.
The money that implement the project and those policies come from FONERWA. So people who want money, they plug into FONERWA. FONERWA plugs into ministry to get guidance and policies orientation.
So we've heard from the three gentlemen just creating context. We are trying to follow the money and still understanding where the money goes. Give us your perspective.
We need to not confuse things. I agree with you. It's really important to say that when you see such a large amount of money being approved through a World Bank development policy loan, it really isn't the same thing as the funds given to FONERWA. At least in the past 5 years, FONERWA has worked as a demand-led fund, meaning we wanted to really incentivize and encourage grassroots interventions and initiatives from Rwandan, whether in civil society, private sector, district level or central government. What the government just signed now, it has nothing to do with that. It is really just part of the economic plan and the economic development plan. But where the two kind of merge is that obviously, as Innocent said, there is influence, and obviously, this is the government's fund, so it is influenced through the strategies and the policies of government. But vice versa, also FONERWA is also here to influence these policies. So, obviously, Rwanda has put a great deal of attention on green energy, but that doesn't mean that needs necessarily to go through FONERWA. If there are other ways and other issues that need to be solved in the energy sector, that's why this type of loans are approved. Through FONERWA, what we need to make sure that we do is that we are additional, that we come on top of those business as usual funding and really make sure that it is climate mainstreamed and climate proofed.
Fantastic. Which brings me now back to you, Mr. Kabenga. So, what are the mistakes or maybe the perspective that we don't put into consideration when some of the civil societies and organizations are trying to access financing? We talk about innovative financing, and I know you're best placed to talk about that. What do we miss out when we're trying to work out an innovative finance conversation?
Thank you very much. I wouldn't go into the financial instrument and technicality because I'm not in that. However, I will talk from experience. We had a meeting here in Kigali 2 years ago or a year ago, and we had members of civil society, especially those who operate in environmental field. And they were asking why don't they access funds? But the reasons were very clear. I wouldn't say mistakes. Rather, after that, I will propose what is missing. Is that one, people were asking for money 10 times the amount they have managed in the past. Number two, proposals, some of them, or many of them, were not very well written. You know how it is to write a proposal that will be accepted as bankable. Number three, they were working separately. I remember we told them, why don't you go together? If you have been managing 100,000 times 10, you have some money, then you can go and have a proposal that is there. And we told Rengoff. So I think mistakes are made mainly by civil society that does not go together and have kind of a collective effort and come as a strong green investment branch, if you want, and then they can get money. Another thing is that without saying that is a mistake, we should also help them in the capacity and give some orientation, because that is also very much needed, because the little money they get comes from different areas, but they have to implement some small projects. So if you want to really to help private sector and the government, because I think the new FONERWA will devote about 15% to civil society and 45% to private sector, moving from 20%. So I think they need some help in capacity, but also they have to get organized and have a kind of a strong, I want to say leadership, but it's not what I wanted to say. Have a strong cohesion so that they can be able to sit together, prepare bankable projects, and they can do that.
Right. Mr. Gakumba, you've been poked more than 4 times in his response. Do you care to respond?
Thank you so much. Well, I differ a little bit from one of his statements that civil society is disorganized. I come from the Nile Basin Discourse Forum, that is an umbrella of 43 local NGOs, and we are managing close to 500,000 euros from Nordic Climate Facility right now. If we can access funds from Nordic Climate Facility, I don't know how many kilometers it is from here to the Nordic region, that means we have the capacity. However, there's a little bit of an exclusion that we do not know some of this information, and I think the way information is being dispersed and shared, and I don't know which civil society you're talking about, you've been including, that's a bit of a challenge as well. I'll get back to that. However, if the challenge is about the money the civil society is managed, I propose that FONERWA establishes a small grants program. If the money is meant for the civil society, and they can manage between 50,000 to 250,000. I would propose that you establish a branch of small grants program, like Jeff is doing something like this on small grants program. And I know UNDP is already managing something like this. I've seen the lady here, Lord, she's managing that. And a lot of cooperatives and NGOs are getting money from there. So if FONERWA is to benefit all Rwandans, I think that there should be open space for that. About leadership, I believe in RGB, and I don't think you discredit RGB because RGB gives out the legal entities. All right, so the leadership, there's no leadership problem. We are very transparent and we are audited in everything that we do. So if you want to build our capacity to dance to the tune of the requirements for FONERWA, you're talking about millions of dollars that CSOs cannot manage. But if you opened an opportunity and say, whoever receives money should have an implementation plan where CSOs are involved, and maybe private sector, because the cost effectiveness and value for money for FONERWA, the CSOs, most of them, like if you're investing, they do co-financing. So 20%, 15%, that's a requirement they already pass. So I don't know why they cannot pass FONERWAs. So we should think about that. Thank you. Right,
Mr. Kakuma, you mentioned something about the grassroots level and the financing being trickled down all the way down, which brings me now to Nhare. One of the pointers is that private companies can access the funding, but the minimum amount, the minimum loan amount is $70,000, and private companies must provide 30% of match funding. I fail to understand how that exactly appeals to the certain grassroots level that we're talking about, because we have that and then we have the innovation investment, which I told you we would talk about. So how are you, just help us understand a case study of where you've seen someone within the grassroots level, individually, not as an umbrella corporation, access this amount of funding with the 30% match funding as well.
Basically about that question, we actually have a number of innovation grants being implemented right now. But as you rightly stated, it's been a challenge even for us. In the initial design of the fund, we actually targeted a market segment that was over 70,000. But with our interaction with the private sector, we actually realized that up to 80% of our population was under that threshold. And when you go to the village, you'll actually find individuals who have very good innovations, but actually don't have the skills to develop a bankable project. Access to finance is a challenge. And it's something we thought about as a fund, and we're like, moving forward, how do we reach this market segment that we completely left out in the initial design of the fund? So within the EDPRS2, there's actually an initiative to develop a climate innovation center. And a scoping work of that has been done. And this climate innovation center will actually come out to target that segment of people who want access to finance of under 10,000. And it will be actually providing incubation services, proposal development, where you bring in international experts to help the Mturaje at the grassroots level, and also provide access to finance.
Right. Do we have any time deadlines, any time tags?
So the scoping work has been completed, and this has been submitted to the ministry that has oversight over FONERWA and the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning, and we believe it's something that will definitely be a priority in the NST that will start implementing next year.
And which brings me now to you, of course, as an advisor within the low carbon scheme of things, you understand the essence of taking things segment by segment or portion by portion as we move towards a particular goal. We'd like you to maybe give feedback on the same, on what you think would be a proper approach to this particular financing scheme, or trying to address different segments of the market.
So I think we now have more or less 5 years of experience of the different financing instruments that we have offered through FONERWA. So Bright talked about the credit line, and actually, Bright, it would be good if also you could mention the feedback you've had on the size of the credit line. So while it is seen as sometimes not so attractive because you need to bring your own equity, you need to compare that with other instruments who are available in the market. Not many funds for climate give you upfront money, even if it's on a concessional loan to private sector. So I do still think that it is a pretty attractive offer for the private sector. You have more results-based finance, for example, and there you have to do all the upfront investment yourself before you actually get any money back. In the case of FONERWA, you are given that from day one, so it's still quite an attractive one. But maybe what I would suggest is for the private sector, if we could maybe rethink about on the FONERWA demonstration window. So at the moment, I think if you apply for the FONERWA demonstration window or grant as a private sector, you need to go through the same application process as with any other instrument. However, maybe what we could be considering going forward in the next phase is potentially to have something more light. Something in DFID, we have this program called Frontier Technology Livestream, where a DFID advisor is paired with a private sector provider, and you pitch in an application of 5 pages where you answer very easy questions, and then you have to pitch in to a Dragon's Den for about half an hour, and you get a pilot money of between 100 and 200,000 pounds. That's way less than what FONERWA offers on demonstration grants, but it is a lot quicker. Everything is done within a 2 weeks period, and you can test ideas that way. So I wonder whether that could be something that might appeal a bit more to the grassroots private sector that we're trying to target with FONERWA. Also, I think in terms of your issue of the small projects and having facilities on small grants, I do think that's also potentially something FONERWA should be looking at in the next phase. How can we, instead of having a pool of funds available for any type of projects, how can we set up themed facilities that address the issues of having to manage small grants? So you just set up a whole facility, and NGOs can directly apply to that facility. That reduces the biggest constraint that FONERWA is facing, which is a really high transaction cost for small projects. So I do think that so far in the past 5 years, I can confidently say that FONERWA has tried to reach out to the grassroots movement. If you were to compare FONERWA's work with any other African climate fund, it has reached a lot more kind of the inclusive grassroots issues. But I think going forward, there's a lot more we can do in terms of offering innovative financing instruments.
Right. Of course, we can't talk about innovation without addressing the particular issue on R&D, research and development, and which brings me now to your 4 financing priorities, right? But the question now will go to Mr. Kabenga to help us understand it from the Global Green Growth Institute's perspective. We have number 2 within the 4 financing priorities. They mentioned R&D and technology transfer and implementation. Now, trends change rapidly, and this could be either very easy for the company or very costly. So it's either or, depending on how prepared we are. Now, we have elements even within the Kigali Amendment that we've talked about that constantly have to be studied. So how costly is it? How costly is R&D from your perspective, or how prepared are we to tackle this particular financing priority?
Thank you very much. Before I talk about if it's costly or not, I think we need to emphasize that it's important, it's needed. I think that is element number 1. And in order to, I think we can start with a small fund targeting some specific technologies. Because if you look at the priorities that we have in green growth and strategy, you realize that there are some really priorities. So if you look at those, sometimes we realize that you need to have a kind of innovative thinking, but do some research and understand, and after that you can pilot and then scale up. So it can be expensive, but we can look at the possibilities where we can, depending on how we can get funds, and then from there we start at a small scale, priorities, and then we move on and scale up.
Right. Ordinarily, the next question now has to go to you. Within the Nile Basin, we have other countries that have advanced in terms of R&D, research and development, but we still have possibly people like the governor for Nairobi saying that he will not stop working until Nairobi is as clean as Kigali. So how do you, please, a round of applause, please. That was actually, he challenged the president and other presidents. Now everyone wants to be as clean as Kigali, and there's a reason why it's working here. But they have advanced R&D, and they're well more capable already to tackle such issues. So just talk to us about such a comparison that we're trying to work out.
When I grew up, I was told that charity begins from home. Rwandans have a social responsibility to maintain their status and exceptionalism from other societies. And another thing, it's how much are we willing to participate voluntarily. Unlike most of the cultures that I've visited or I've stayed with, we are a little bit different from most of the cultures, and I don't think we make any magic. It's within us that, and what I want to bring out is social capital. We are like a capital, we are a source of resource ourselves, that when you look at Umuganda, we do this without being paid. And another thing is duty and patriotism as well. That's one thing I will talk about. And again, the need within ourselves, the spirit within ourselves that we want to participate and be vigilant and a little bit look at a wider perspective. The civil society today is a little bit different from what we used to perceive about it being anti-government or something like that. The civil society is a development partner. The civil society is a stakeholder. The civil society is a pro-development. Because the challenges we face today with of climate impacts, food insecurity, emerging diseases, poverty, and so forth, and growing populations, they do not alienate or they do not segregate you as an individual. So personally, and everybody, if we took a responsibility, I don't think Nairobi would just adopt that by the force of the governor refusing to work or something like that. But it's supposed to be, it's a mindset. You get your people out of a box, the people to start thinking that my contribution, my participation is something very credible. So it gets back to FONERWA and other financing mechanisms and other government programs. There's no single project that we design or we implement that it does not contribute to the Vision 2020, emerging to Vision 2050, EDPRS2, EDPRS3, all these green growth strategies. We pick one of the components like Imihigo, and we contribute. We identify as our contribution what it is. And another thing that I want to look at about the cost effectiveness and also the feasibility of working with civil society, where you would invest $100,000, you might only invest $50,000 because this contribution comes from labor that you get from the civil society. If you want to talk about value for money, like FONERWA always talks about in the requirements for application, the value for money is a resource that you get from the social capital of the people itself. So everything you look at, everything we're doing, it's us as an individual, the responsibility. There's no magic. It's about self-discipline and also equity and also being sustainable to yourself as well. I think that's the magic.
Right, tying it in now to the country. Bright, I'll come to you. We saw recently, to secure the next phase of growth, there was that conversation on a revised law governing the fund, and that was recently gazetted. Now we're seeing the fund contribute a lot more to the national policy. We'd like to understand what exactly changed in terms of your mandate, now shifting from that to the developments currently.
In terms of the new law, the mandate of FONERWA doesn't change. What has changed is that we've been enabled to actually be in a position where we can support the government strategies and policies even better. So I believe in the last 5 minutes, we've been talking about some of the challenges that the fund was facing. So this new law actually puts us in a position where we can better target private sector, civil society, and the public sector. So going forward, we've been operating as a demand-led fund. And what that means is that we're trying to spur innovation through creating competition. He was talking about the share of civil society projects in the fund portfolio. It was very small compared to, for instance, the public sector. And that's because it's a demand-led fund. When you talk about 96 or $100 billion, it seems like much, but we don't have unlimited resources. In a study in 2009, the economics of climate change, they're actually talking about that we're losing up to 1% of our GDP. And we needed up to between $50 billion and $300 billion a year to be in a position where we can mitigate effects of climate change. Right. The fund has mobilized $100 billion in 5 years. So definitely we don't have unlimited resources. So going forward, what are we going to do? the fund has been restructured to function in a hybrid manner, where you have the demand-led facility for the civil society and private sector to spur innovation. And then we have the programmatic approach for the public sector, where we pick certain programs from the NST, GGCRS, and work with the concerned sectors to actually put these into implementation.
Right.
Thank you.
I'd like to understand, Hanan, maybe I could just reel you in here, probably something that Bright might want to chime in as well. So I'd like to understand how they work ministry to ministry or policy to policy. We have the natural resources, of course, the new board that was put in place, they recently revised their targets and they said they are now going to achieve lots more in the range of hundreds of millions to try and mine within the Rwandan borders. So that means there is a potential of exceeding degradation to the environment and to the soil right now, something that counters what the Green Growth Fund is working on, because you're trying to work out a system where the environment still stays put even as you try to get the most out of it. So how are you working out that conversation, that interministerial conversation?
So probably that's a question for government than to a donor, but
fortunately we have representation of the government right here.
So I will let them potentially address the bulk of the question. But I can tell you how DFID is addressing these issues. So from the FONERWA front, Bright mentioned that it's going to become this demand-led hybrid fund with a demand-led branch and with a programmatic branch. In the programmatic branch, we could explore potentially having a program that is really about kind of green mining, for example, or other issues that commodities or our exports ambitions that Rwanda has that have the potential of harming the environment. But from the DFID perspective, we, for example, are the leading donor on the mining side as well. So how do I reconcile the fact that my colleague sitting right next to me is doing mining and I'm the climate advisor? But the way we do it in DFID, and I think the government of Rwanda is an excellent example of taking this approach on board, is we call it mainstreaming. We mainstream climate into the mining program. So that mining program doesn't actually need to apply for FONERWA funding, but within its practices, within its budget, it is taking actions to make sure that the mine is green in the sense of the environment is rehabilitated. So that's kind of how you do it in practice. On a policy level dialogue, obviously, when this issue came up of DFID getting into mining, I very promptly had a conversation with DG Coletta about this. How do we make sure that the two agencies are talking to each other and agree on what we call a green mine? So I think it is, there is in the government of Rwanda already a willingness to have mainstreaming within their own operations. But I think, yeah, FONERWA could also be looking at potentially having a whole program that is focused on these issues.
Perfect. At that point, I think the best segue is to ask the Honorable Minister if you have any thoughts on the same. We'd like to understand that issue on degradation vis-a-vis development, and then we open to the audience now for your questions.
Thank you for your question. I'm going just to say that green growth doesn't mean we're going to stop any particular economic activity.
Right.
We're going to continue to develop infrastructures, we are going to build roads, we are going to do mining, but in a sustainable way. And we can actually bring these mining companies to contribute to the protection of the environment, not only to restore the degraded land, but also to positively contribute to the protection of the environment. And these will extend from afforestation to water bodies protection and so on and so forth. So green growth doesn't mean we're going just to plant trees and do nice things. We are going to develop our economy through various sectors, but do it in a sustainable way.
Right. Perfect. Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Now, it's over to the audience. Please, if you have any questions, just kindly raise your hand. We'll try to take 2 or 3 questions at once. We have 1 question there, 2 questions, 1 question here.
When I was listening to Mr. Gakumba, I hear that FONERWA is not working with the civil society. So in this case, who is the civil society and who is the private sector? Then FONERWA also said that The civil society doesn't have the capacity and leadership. Why can't FONERWA provide that? Because we are trying to address the same issues in the country. Thank you.
Thank you. Right there.
I would like to know how we can find a cooperation with FONERWA, and if we could implement any project in Egypt, and also inverse, we can implement any project in Rwanda under the supervision of FONERWA or not. The allocation fund or available fund by in FONERWA can be moved to my country to implement any project, or just must be implemented in Rwanda on the ground. Thank you.
A few years ago, I met the DJ minister, the lady who was on the front in Marrakesh, and I was talking about people going back to school, in front of the World Bank and everybody. And a lot of people was laughing, but I remember that time the representative of the World Bank on that side say he was right. So what he say is very important. It's just an anecdote. Now, one of the things I want to say is this is a beautiful picture. And the sad thing is in Africa, we start big project, beautiful like this. In 2 years, you're going to hear that this factory is closed somewhere. Like I said again, I'm coming back to that anecdote where I was saying that people need to go back to school. Why I say that, do you know that every computer we sell in the world have in the selling price have a percentage allocated to recycling? And these people are supposed to be able to get that money. It's their money. So we put a factory like this, and we didn't think about how we can make it sustainable, because that money, every computer, this company is going to be able to recycle. They're supposed to have a percentage of that recycled money, because they are the ones who are doing that recycling. And I'm sure if you go there, they're not collecting the serial number. And the key, the treasure, I saw the thing saying like from trash to treasure. The treasure of this is that serial number.
Right.
And I'm sure if you go there, they have no serial number of each computer. And it's what they need to collect to get that money.
Right. So I think the first question was to Mr. Gakumba on who the civil society is and who the private sector, and why can't FONERWA address that?
Actually, I think that question was not mine.
It was a two-part question.
Yes, it goes to Mr. Innocent.
Yeah, I think they chose you first because you were the most...
He mentioned my name because that was a little bit of a complex scenario where Mr. Innocent said that there's poor leadership in the civil society. I think there's a misconception. Well, sorry. I think it's a mindset. It's a misconception of civil society that the hierarchy and the legacies of civil society, being freedom fighters and fighting all this sort of stuff. Now, what we're looking at, if the civil society are fighting wars and liberations, and I think climate change impacts, they deserve that fight as well. So, inclusiveness and participation of the civil society in this war, the civil society should not be alienated. If there are issues of leadership, maybe and you want civil society to tap into your funds, create an opportunity for them to raise awareness. For example, the newly gazetted law is the first time I'm hearing about it, and the new strategic focus that's being talked about. And again, we've been asking questions, why is there delay for another call for proposals? Because my partners from the Swedish Meteorological and Hydrological Institute wanted to partner for a project in Rwanda. We came with them to FONERWA's office, and they were really willing to bring in more money as well as contribution. So if we have a little bit of alienations, we are limiting ourselves to access alternative funds that are out there. And again, when we exclude other beneficiaries with the issues of poor leadership, and I don't think there's anywhere in this country where there's any poor leadership in this country. Starting from homes to the biggest of the office in this country, there's good leadership. So I disagree with that statement personally, and I don't think that's relevant. Thank you so much.
Right. Let's just allow Hanan to respond, because there was another question that also related to you.
No, I think right after I respond, you should definitely also address the issues, because I don't think it's true to say to our colleague, I don't remember who asked the question, in Zambia, it is not true to say that FONERWA doesn't have partnership with CSOs or private sector. There is, I think I got my numbers right, but about 10 partners CSOs and 8 private sector partners, something. Oh, the other way around, sorry. So it isn't true that there isn't, and we just need to be patient. This is still a very new area. This is still a very new fund. So the requirements to put into the application are quite hard. So as Bright was saying, it's all about competition. And so if the standards are not up to if the quality of the proposal is not up to standards, we shouldn't lower our standards just to have a higher buy-in from civil society. However, the way FONERWA has tried to address this is really having drop-in clinics, for example, where before you put forward an application, as a civil society, as a district, or as a private sector, you can actually have conversations with FONERWA to understand how you really design a strong project, how you really apply to a FONERWA fund that sets you up for success. And these things have had kind of their results. I think in the last call for proposal, which we weren't able to approve because of governance issues, there were a much higher quality level of proposal, both from CSOs and private sector. So I do think we need to be slightly patient as well. This is a new area. This is a new fund where everyone is trying to learn as they go. And I do not think that the answer should be lower the standard, make it easier for everyone to access. But the opposite, get everyone at that level. So one idea I kind of have, and obviously I don't run FONERWA, so it's up to the CEO to see if he agrees with me, but one way of maybe professionalizing the CSOs here in Rwanda, not that they need very high quality, very high leadership, we all agree, but one way could be really to ensure that whenever an international NGO, for example, applies for a FONERWA fund, it is required that it partners with a Rwandan CSO, and with kind of a handover period planned for, so that there is more ownership and more capacity built into Rwandan CSOs.
Right, perfect. Thank you. Bright, I know you have something that you'd like to say in regards to the same. Plus, if you could also answer the question on cooperation and implementation with Egypt, and whether if they have a product or project, it stays here or is implemented in the country as well.
Thank you very much. In terms of the cooperation with Egypt, when FONERWA was designed, it was actually designed as a national fund to implement national priorities, be it the EDPRS or the GGCRS. But in terms of the partnership, we've been doing this with other countries where we could actually go and help them set up a fund through the support we get from UNDP, share success stories. But in terms of actual implementation of providing funds outside the country, the focus is in Rwanda. But definitely if Egypt needed support in terms of how they can set up a fund, how they can attract climate finance, that's something we would definitely discuss. The other question, I believe, was from the colleague from Senegal, who was asking about the E-West facility and its sustainability. So the way this project was designed was actually as a PPP. So it's being implemented by the Ministry of Commerce and Trade, but they'll actually hand it over to a private sector company where there will be a memorandum of understanding around revenue sharing. And this money actually comes back into the fund to support other initiatives in the future. Then there was also a comment about the serial numbers. I believe, personally, it's not something I knew, but we have the coordinator of the project seated here. And I believe it's something we could actually focus on and see if there's a possibility of us collecting that revenue, because it will be a new source of revenue. If there's actually money attached to a serial number for recycling, then I believe it's an avenue we can charter. Thank you.
I think you should collect your royalties for the idea. Thank you very much for that. Let's just, do you have a...
I just want to state that it should not be understood that FONERWA is not working with the civil society organizations. As of now, just from my mind, I see 3 projects which are under implementation, and it is a partnership between district and the civil society organization. One is in the district of Muhanga, the other one in the district of Ngororero, and the third one is in Gatsibo. Maybe there are some others, but it will not be understood that our civil society organizations are weak and cannot get support from FONERWA. They do.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for the clarity. Do you have a point?
Mine, I wanted to say something to the gentleman from Egypt. Well, we are on the upstream of the River Nile, and I don't think if there was an opportunity for them to bring funds here and implement a project with us here, we would welcome that, to partner with that. I think you're more welcome to come and work with the civil society in managing the catchment for this part of the Nile, because since you receive the water from us, if you have the money, I would prefer that you bring the money to this side. Thank you.
All right. Let's bring the microphone now to the front. We have a few ladies and gentlemen who wanted to chime in. So maybe to the right, two, and then to the left, here and here.
I want to respond and react and comment on civil society and climate funds arrangement. Of course, coming from the African Development Bank, I can give an experience on living through such challenges. We created the Africa Climate Change Fund to deal with these kind of situations. And then I will use this opportunity to call on all of you. We launch calls for proposals and indeed go through the issues that Bright is raising. Capacity issues, the ones Innocent brought up. But we also have the resource and the muscle to blend and channel and subordinate loans that get to where you're looking at. So in this whole partnership arrangement, we are creating the Africa NDC Hub as a platform that will listen to you and bring in our most of the logos on there are part of the hub. So we'll have that stakeholder engagement that will take these challenges so that we don't have all teeth in FONERWA trying to eat the little, we want to bring the big meal on the table. Thank you very much.
Let's just handle those questions, then we'll come straight to the gentleman here. There was a question that was asked on, first of all, I think you could give feedback on the points that have been raised. Bright, let's just kick off with that, and then we'll come to you, Mr. Gakumba. There were a lot of concerns.
I'll start off with a question around value for money and how that has been difficult for the civil society. So what I could say about this is that when we talk about grants and the credit line, when we say value for money, we don't mean the same thing. For grants, civil society and public sector, we actually want to see the benefits accrued to the beneficiary. When it comes to the credit line and private sector, they're actually making an investment to make money, generate profit. So we look at return on investment. So if I give an example of ACOS as a project, you're carrying out research to benefit the Muturaji. But how? After your research comes to an end, after we made this investment, does it get him out of poverty? Does it improve how he carries out his agriculture? So when you're filling out a template, we actually don't look at the financial value attaching, but rather the co-benefits accrued to the beneficiary. So I believe that's what I could say about the value for money.
There was a concern that was raised here. You mentioned a line where you said, emphasize on the idea, not the quality. You said something like that.
Yes.
Right, emphasize on the idea, but not the quality of the proposal, the quality of the idea. Over to you.
So I'll say one thing. NST, National Strategy for Transformation. We want to bring about transformational change. We're moving at a pace that's really fast if we want to achieve our government objectives and goals. So the way the fund is structured is to look at those proposals that are actually ready to go to implementation and bear fruit very early on. You want to get people out of poverty. But I also mentioned that going into the future, we're thinking about the programmatic and the demand-led. So there will definitely be an opportunity for the private sector, for the civil society, to try innovation for the small grants projects. But our focus currently has been with limited resources, what we do very fast to actually affect positively the Mturaji.
All right. You'd like to chime in?
So yeah, just on the VFM, because you seem to feel like it hasn't really addressed your question. So I agree with Bright. I mean, in DFID, 99% of our work is not on investment. So 99% of our VFM measures are about, you know, what type of benefit is accrued to the beneficiaries. And I think the difficulty that civil societies and many other applicants have had with FONERWA is how do you monetize the non-market benefits? And I think maybe one thing that FONERWA could do better is to give the kind of training on how you monetize these things that are not don't have a market value themselves, but it's definitely not the intention to expect that there's an internal rate of return for grant investments. So, you know, the way the FONERWA application kind of goes into economy, efficiency, and effectiveness is very different from a grant perspective than from a private sector perspective. So even, you know, one thing that you pointed out, which is really important in the climate adaptation issues, is that the benefits actually don't even materialize after more than 7 years. So maybe the issue should be that you should look at a longer timeline when you're talking about your VFM. But definitely, I don't think anyone working on concessional finance should feel that VFM works against them, because that's what we've been doing in the aid industry ever since the aid industry has been created. So.
Right. Maybe as you talk about the next phase, designing the second phase that was mentioned and having the special purpose vehicle, you could also touch on how now the small grants program and larger conglomerates like the African Development Bank can tap into helping you with the special purpose vehicle. Because that was mentioned as well, the African Development Bank, right?
It wasn't exactly a question.
It was in retrospect, right?
In terms of how we could actually work together.
A suggestion, right?
Yes, and that's something we take on board. We'll definitely approach the AFDB and see if there's a way we could tap into the resources, the bigger resources they have, and actually do the implementation here on the ground.
Okay.
Yeah. There's also a question around the CIC and universities, how we support.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I believe when it comes to our youth, I wouldn't just limit it to green growth. I believe it's something we look at a national level. And our Ministry of Environment has actually signed an MOU with the University of Rwanda to provide support in terms of research, internships, and so on and so forth. So when you talk about the Climate Innovation Center, this is something that will actually be targeting that market segment. Students fresh from school who have very bright ideas and need a place where they could actually have incubation services. People supporting them develop their ideas and actually take them to the market.
All right. Perfect.
Yes, I wish just to mention that there are other facilities in the country or other funds which can finance good ideas and innovations. One of them is the Rwanda Innovation Endowment Fund, which is under the Ministry of Education. So we should not try to find all the solutions in FONERWA. FONERWA can be complemented by other facilities which are available in the country.
Right, perfect. There's one question there, but there was, all right, Mr. Gakumba, we didn't get to hear from you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Bright talked about that we're moving very fast. Well, I would suggest that we do not move so fast like a rabbit and then we miss the hole where it resides. We should move along and move with everybody if we want to be sustainable. What I suggest that we use the civil society as an opportunity for testing new innovations and use it as a lab. To me, climate change is an opportunity for Africa because we have a lot of space. We have room for testing and experimenting what works better, what the other industrialized countries did not do in the beginning. So if we do the same thing, expect different results, that would be a contradiction of itself. And another thing, there's a lot of new innovations within the civil society that are being missed out. We keep investing a lot of money and still getting conflicting results, not getting the targets that we've set for ourselves. For example, I'll give you an example on policy. Last year, I was with the US Department of State, living in Florida, working under a community solutions program. They have copied a system of the bees, how bees work together. It's called the Hive Session. The Hive Session helps community members to discuss pertinent issues, for example, in a community. For example, if you have Umuganda, during the day for Umuganda, and then you get these people together, discuss, for example, a water issue or an energy issue or maybe a food insecurity issue, or maybe there's a gap in communication. I think this is where we might be missing the point, investing a lot of money continuously, getting almost nothing. And this is common in Africa. For example, the gentleman from Senegal said that you have an industry, you've invested massively, and then after a short time, it has run out, it's not working, operating anymore. It's because you put in the capital that keeps running without producing more capital. I'm not an economist, but I think everybody's an economist. If you can manage anything by yourself, you're an economist. So when you look at that, there is, what we're missing the point there is that we are excluding the key beneficiaries. Everybody here is a civil society, except that we wear coats to go to sit in an office, a government office, or somewhere. But everything involves us, and it comes back to us. So if you support the civil society, you, in the end, supporting yourself, your family, your kid, and everybody. So it is your duty to support yourself through such initiatives of empowering the civil society. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Kabenga, before we throw to Mr. Olivier, maybe you could just hear your view on convergence and a collaborative approach. There's been a lot of conversation on grassroots level, small grants program, and what parties need to be involved as we get into the next phase.
I do think that partnership is needed for everybody. Actually, that's what I said at the beginning. I think there was some misunderstanding. But even when you are a giant organization, you always need some partners so that you can be able to move ahead. And that's what I suggested, actually, when you have civil society organizations, when they go together, they can go further than when they go individually. For FONERWA, I think I don't have lessons to give them in terms of our partnership. But from the GGI point of view, we will continue working with FONERWA because we have been working with FONERWA from the side of technical advisory role, and that one will continue. Yeah, I think that's what I could say for now.
So, bright Nare, to the extreme end, Green Fund Program Manager Innocent Kabenga, John Gakumba, and Hanan Hafrawi. Right, thank you very much for your insight on these particular matters.